Hello, and welcome to the Digital Workspace Works podcast. I'm Ryan Purvis, your host, supported by our producer Heather Bicknell. In this series, you'll hear stories and opinions from experts in the field, stories from the front lines, the problems they face and how they solved them, the areas they focused on from technology, people and processes, to the approaches they took that will help you to get to the grips with the digital workspace inner workings. Welcome, John Hewlett, to the Digital Workspace Works podcast. Do you want to give everyone a bit of an introduction to yourself, please?
Thanks, Ryan, and it's great to be here. So, as Ryan said, my name is John Hewlett. I've been very fortunate to have been in the mobile and technology space for almost 20 years now. It's pretty much since Ryan and I left university, actually, many years ago. And I've focused predominantly on mobile and working with mobile operators across the African continent. So I've been very fortunate to have traveled to 23 countries across the continent, deploying value-added services, pricing products, fintech solutions with mobile operators across the continent.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned university. You know what I thought of yesterday? That catch that I dropped in that game we were playing cricket against, I can't remember who it was. We were playing for Furendach, but I can't remember who we played against. But I always remember that.
You were a bit off, and for your listeners, what Ryan won't tell you is Ryan was a very gifted baseball player, pitcher, if I remember correctly, and I didn't know that. And Ryan dropped my catch, and I proceeded to use the most profound language to describe my disappointment, to which Ryan picked up the ball and threw it straight back at me. I kept my mouth quiet after that.
And so began our friendship.
Exactly.
Which must be close on 20 years, 21 years now.
It is so, yeah.
Frightening.
Crazy. Catches up with us all, huh?
It does. So does my receding hairline. So the reason why I wanted to have you on is you've led the charge for me into the Apple economy, not the ecosystem, because it's an expensive business, being a member of the Apple world. And I thought maybe it'd be good for people to hear how you've operated in this world and how you operate in your day-to-day activities.
No, it sounds good. So it's always a very interesting debate. It's am I an iPhone or an Android user? Am I a PC or am I a Mac? And I truly think any ecosystem that you play in, or economy as you put it out, is fit for purpose. It's based on what you are doing and what works best in terms of the delivery of the work that anyone is doing. Okay. I've had to work in both environments. Over the last 20 years, I've eventually come to the decision that for me, the Apple ecosystem works for me. And every year it gets better, because I think what's happening is that more and more vendors that are out there are developing more and more Apple products. So for example, I count myself as a power Microsoft Office user, in particular Word and PowerPoint, and the Mac equivalents are good. They will never be the PC equivalents. It's almost like there's a version ahead. On that still works really, really well. Now you incorporate the world of Teams, for example, in OneDrive, works just as well on a Mac than it does on a PC. That divide, which was there 4 or 5 years ago and older, is not there anymore. The bridge between able to work in the ecosystems is a lot closer now. So I think this ability to do that is one thing. The second thing I think is organizations, obviously, and Ryan, you will know this from your own experience setting IT policies and that with big organizations. IT policies are some of the most rigid policies that you will get, and rightfully so. In the sense of cybersecurity and trying to protect organizations from cybersecurity breaches, you've got to try to plug the holes as much as possible.
Yeah.
But I'm finding now, in my own experience, and I'm not a cyber expert by any stretch of the imagination, is Apple's always been very comfortable in their approach. Their ecosystem's quite tight. So because now you're getting this building on top of each platform, organizations saying you don't have to have a Windows PC to be able to operate within my organization. You're actually comfortable, and in some cases advocate that Macs and the Mac environment can come into our organization because we've got knowledge workers that are doing specific types of work that will get better productivity if they're on that particular piece of equipment.
No, you're spot on. And actually, to your point about the sort of Windows and non-Windows environments getting closer together app-wise. I mean, I got to do some SQL work yesterday, and I was like, I need to find an app for that for my Mac. But Microsoft now builds an app. It's Azure Data Studio, which works on both. So, you don't have to go and find a big third party anymore. I mean, there was some that are going to charge me ridiculous amounts of money, £100 a year or something. But Microsoft has provided that app. And the other thing you mentioned around the policies, the one challenge we had previously with Mac is putting down policies on it, because it was such a different beast to the Windows environment. Windows, you have a lot more control, etc. But I found now that I've switched over that almost a lot of those things that I would need to put policies in for, I don't have to, because most of those things are built into the Mac world anyway. Yeah. So it, in some senses, and there was a study, I got to see if I can find it. I think it was IBM that did it, and they said the cost of managing or maintaining a desktop environment based on Windows versus Mac was 3 or 4 times more expensive. Yeah, because of the flexibility.
It's going to be interesting, and I want to touch on a point before I go to my next point. A lot of the stuff now, and we'll talk about this, I think, a little bit later on in this chat.
Yeah.
All the work we're doing is up in the clouds now. It's not necessarily sitting on local machine now. And I think that has changed the way, and in particular for me, and I'll talk about my experiences of I'm not even beholden to the Apple environment. I'm beholden to my browser.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, the majority of my work goes to the browser. I just want to make a side point on the PC versus Mac environment. Apple always had this, I'm going to say, this elitist status thing. A lot more expensive. And don't get me wrong, a brand new MacBook Pro 16-inch will set you back a small fortune. There's no disputing that. But what Apple has done really well, and in particular with the launch of their new M1 chipset with the MacBooks, which is what you and I are both using now, and where our conversation came from.
Yeah, it's all your fault that I bought 2. Not 1, but 2.
Yeah. Once you go Mac, you don't go back.
Yeah.
The price point is a lot more competitive now. So if you had to weigh up the entry-level MacBook Air right now with an M1 chip in South Africa, obviously I'm speaking in the South African context, it's actually 5,000 or 6,000 Rand cheaper than the equivalent Microsoft Surface, which is a brilliant device. You can spec for spec, they're matching up. But when you're paying at 25,000 to 27,000 Rand for an equivalent, Mac, which is sitting at, I think, 18 or 19,000 for the M1 entry-level MacBooks, it's a big consideration, in particular for guys that are in the contract world, the gig economy, that are looking for the power and flexibility, but also can't afford that particular price point. I think
you're spot on it. And the thing that I really appreciated when we bought the Macs was they took a trade-in.
Yes.
So, even before the trade-in, and I don't know why this was the case, maybe because of the summit with new products coming out, but already the MacBook Air here, the M1 chip, was cheaper than the UK. I would have paid £1,000 in the UK, and when I did the conversion, it was closer to 750, and then after I did the trade-in, it brought it down to about 700 per device. Yeah. Which, my very fancy Lenovo Windows device here was double the price, and now it's a glorified battery.
It's an interesting, 100%. I think what people are always going to say, and when you get into this debate, and it'd be very interesting to get a Microsoft developer in a conversation like this, because they will talk about flexibility and how the Apple ecosystem is a very closed and very controlled ecosystem. In some cases, that's okay. Sometimes you do need the flexibility of an open environment, depending on the work that you're doing. And then if that's the case, if that's what you're looking for, use that environment. Okay? Yeah. I know for myself, I've got an iPhone, I've got an iPad, I've obviously got my MacBook. My ecosystem works here. For me, as soon as I started using Big Sur on Apple with the M1 chip, my GSM calls from my device are starting to appear. I know there are apps to do that on Windows, but it was intuitive. It just worked. That's the choice. That's the choice someone's always going to make is, if you're going to go into the ecosystem, do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because that just works thing is exactly how I said to Heather, because we've talked about me switching over for a while, and I was actually excited to go, because I bought these on a Friday, set them up over the weekend, and I was actually excited to start work on the Monday. Because I didn't worry about because what was happening with my Windows machine, it was blue screening every couple minutes. Within an hour it would probably crash twice, and you weren't doing anything fancy. You're clicking somewhere. But on your comment about the developer ecosystem, I mean, I still write code every so often, and I've got Visual Studio on my Mac. So and the other point that you make, which is so true now, all your stuff is happening in the cloud. So if I'm actually going to run code, I might run it locally for a couple of minutes just to check it, but then it's been deployed into an Azure workflow. So it doesn't have to live on my desktop anymore.
Well, and I think that's where I think the modern knowledge worker is. That I think what is driving this drive to, with you've got obviously AWS, you've got Azure, you've got Google, Huawei's also got their cloud. Alibaba got a cloud. Everyone's got a damn cloud. Okay,
Yeah.
It's a very cloudy day. Okay.
Yeah.
But the processing power that's now available is you don't need to have these massive machines locally unless you are doing hardcore video, 4K video editing, or you're compiling 3D stuff for whatever it might be. Okay.
Yeah.
The ability to hyperscale into a data center, or be able, sorry, let me rephrase that. The ability to use a hyperscale data center on demand.
Yeah.
Is changing the way I think people are starting to work, but it's also how organizations are choosing to work with customers. So, and maybe it's a good opportunity for us to segue into how I'm using the cloud. So I'll give you. I'm a contractor. I've got my primary customer, which is the company I work for, AWG, and then I choose to do other smaller projects, after hours and on the weekends, that doesn't interfere with my primary customer's work. Because I enjoy doing certain things. Okay. And one of the choices I made, Ryan, was I wanted to try be as independent and controlling of myself and my ecosystem. So I picked certain key SaaS tools that would help me to manage that I didn't have to outsource myself to third parties to do unless absolutely necessary. So one of the great, and this I'm saying things that everyone knows, but it's very interesting when you start experiencing it for yourself. So for example, I've got to manage my books now.
Yeah.
So I looked at, you've got Sage Intacct, you've got Xero, QuickBooks, accounting and ERP solutions in the cloud are very popular at the moment. I ended up choosing QuickBooks as an example. And it was very interesting. There was certain, so I got the base entry level 200 Rand. That for me at the time worked.
Yeah.
Until I needed to do something else. But for me to now suddenly upgrade was literally within seconds.
Yeah.
And the features were available. I can then do the next thing, It wasn't like a whole thing. I know I'm speaking to guys that run ERP and accounting software. You get companies that still try to do a migration. The guys still have desktops underneath the desks that are managing that stuff because it's so legacy. Now, sitting up in the cloud, you literally flick a switch and boom, it's access and available to me and it's going off my credit card. Okay. Yep. So that was one really interesting thing that I looked at. Another interesting one, which becomes a very interesting cost debate for anyone that's doing contract work and you're trying to manage your margins as much as possible, especially if you're a knowledge worker that's a one-man band. And we're finding, Ryan, more and more of those.
Yeah, the gig economy, yeah.
Yeah, the gig economy, where people are getting to the point where they believe their skills are at a point where you don't necessarily need the support of a big organization. You believe you can monetize your skills in a way that is great. The whole side hustle thing, the whole scaling thing, well, that's a whole different debate in a future podcast. But so I looked at one example. I do a lot of PowerPoint presentations for my clients, okay? And there's always a little bit of graphics work that I need to do, okay? Now, I'm not a graphic designer, okay? What I did, I made a choice. I said, okay, cool. The work that I need is very simple work. Let me go and get a 200 Rand course, do the course, entry level to Adobe Illustrator, do it in my own time, okay? Then I go and use Adobe, I go download and pay for Adobe Illustrator in the cloud, well, even though it's obviously a local program, 520 Rand a month, okay, for Adobe Illustrator, okay? Now, what I can do now, instead of having to outsource the work that I would have done, which would have been for a graphic designer 2 seconds worth of work, but would have charged me an hour at 600 Rand an hour per piece of work, whatever it is, I can now do it myself. I've created economies of scale and margin by simply looking at what's available from an education perspective, upskilling myself, getting into the program and doing it.
Yep.
For $700.
Yeah.
So for me, it was a way of trying to optimize my own costs with tools that are out there in the market. It's just about a matter of bridging those tools together.
And I think on that point, I mean, you've upskilled yourself on a product, but not necessarily to do the complicated stuff. But to do the basic thing where you might have to build an icon or something like that. But if you still need the other stuff done, you'll still go get that graphic designer.
Because I want a specialist. If I need someone to build an isometric picture and change this and change that, then absolutely, gig economy says I will go find that person.
Yeah.
But my utility and the spend didn't make sense for the work that I needed to do.
No, and that's we were talking yesterday about WebEx platforms. And, I'm going to do 2 webinars coming up. And it was like, I don't really want to pay for something I'm going to use for 2 webinars. But the actual price point, because that economy of scale is there, if you actually think about it, the return on investment, I can't remember, I think Zoom was going to be £160 for me. Yeah. We only have to close one deal for it to be a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And that's what you're targeting. The other thing I wanted to sort of go into there was tying these things all together, and I think you set me a deck around doing that. But it's almost the sort of growth of things like if then this, then that. Zapier, Integro is what I'm looking at today. Are you playing with that at all, or are you seeing?
So I think so. Zapier is an amazing service. So I myself, I'm not a programmer. I'm not going to sit and write APIs and do integrations. Okay. But the way the API world is evolving now, and services like Zapier, is that it allows the layman in the street to be able to connect services in a logical way.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important and going to become even more important in the gig economy. So I'm going to give you another example, Ryan. So I found I needed a way, because unfortunately I haven't quite yet solved my scaling and growing problem yet. Okay.
Yeah.
Openly will admit that. Okay. It's the challenge of any company. But I needed to track my time effectively so I could see where I can optimize on the projects that would create the most amount of margin for me. Okay. Yeah. And I found this really great service called Harvest. Okay. It's available at getharvest.com. Okay. Yeah. Little plugin. I'll manage all my projects and my tasks. I could set different rates. And Harvest, I've got a little plugin on my Mac, and I hit the clock, and I've just got to be disciplined enough to hit and stop.
Yeah.
Because it's intelligent enough to know that if the keystrokes aren't going, it'll actually calculate the time and remove the time. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
But what that did was it allowed me to start to track where my most effective use of my time versus the projects I was doing, and the deliverables ultimately going to a customer.
Yeah.
So I can now, in near real time, say, okay, cool. If I do a case study, I get much more margin case study versus doing a PowerPoint proposal, as an example, because there's a lot of heavy lifting or whatever it might be. Okay.
Yeah.
What that does is allows me to manage my expectations to my clients and say, okay, cool. I could do this in X amount of time given my controlling of my time. What Harvest does, it's got an integration with QuickBooks. So I can actually literally do direct invoicing if I wanted to, directly out of Harvest into QuickBooks, which has got an integration with an API, and zap it out. Yep. Then I need to think, well, is there a step before that? Yes, there is. You use something like Trello. You have a Trello card managing your tasks, which is linked to Harvest, tracking your hours, which is then linked to your accounting software, which is then doing the invoicing out. Then you can go even further than that and say, well, I'm doing a lot. I'm a very email dependent person for my sins. This is how I've always been.
Yeah.
You can link your emails and actions and attachments in emails to Trello, to Harvest. And now you're building a workflow using different tools, not in the same ecosystem, outside of the ecosystem, to help maximize the way in which you can do your work.
Yeah.
Save time, because the more time you save, the more you can put into delivering to clients if you don't have economies of scale or a platform or whatever it might be. Zapier, what we found is that is a really nice glue.
Yeah.
It was very interesting. Like Harvest and QuickBooks have a direct integration already. It's available. Click of a button. Okay.
Yeah.
So as this concept of the side hustle starts to gain more momentum, and there's great theories and concepts on how to do it, what the side hustle is, and all that. For me, a great side hustle in the gig economy is ensuring that you deliver a professionally looking service for what you're doing, because you've now picked this particular opportunity. If you use the tools in the right sort of way and you can configure them in the right sort of way, you look like a big organization. You give your client the comfort that he's not just some fly-by-night one-man band. And there's a psychological impact of that in the type of work that you do with customers.
Yeah, and I think that supports almost the charge rate that you're going to put out there, because you don't look like a one-man band. When you're a one-man band, everyone's psychology goes, well, I can push them for price, but they won't argue with a big organization, which is just a strange behavioral thing. A couple of things I wanted to ask you about that. So do you sit down and draw out your entire sort of end-to-end process and then kind of go, I need a tool for this, I need a tool for this, and then and join them together? Or is it more well, I needed to track my time so I could invoice a client. So you went and looked for something, then you did that. And then over time, you're like, it would be great if these things talk to each other. Oh, shit, they do. Because I find, like, personally, that sometimes I get caught up in the analysis paralysis of which tools should I use? And you start getting into, like, what all the capabilities are, and then you actually don't pick a tool. You burn more time looking at what's possible.
So Ryan, definitely the latter. It was as I was doing, and I'm a firm believer of you only truly know something until you're actually doing it. Okay, so there's a good part for the theory. Okay, but you can't get into that. You just become to the point of you just don't get anything else. Okay.
Yeah.
So what I did was, as I was doing projects, as a problem arose, I tried to find a solution to that problem. My first problem was, okay, cool. How do I manage my time? And there's a lot. Again, there's a ton of tools out there, a ton of them. Harvest was just a nice, simple tool that did the job. Okay? It does a job, and it does a job very, very well. Okay, and I quite like tools like that. Okay, cool. So I picked Harvest for that. Okay. Even before Harvest, it was a big choice to make. Am I a Googler or am I a Microsofter? Okay.
Yeah.
And I actually chose the Google ecosystem over the Microsoft ecosystem, even though I actually run both. So Microsoft Office 365 is my secondary ecosystem, because I do have clients that require work within OneDrive. And OneDrive is an immensely powerful tool, okay, especially when you link it to the Office suite, okay. But I chose Google because I could manage my email, I can manage my documents. I do find in my own experience that Google Drive is a better product than OneDrive. I just find on Mac it behaves a bit better. It's a bit easier to manage.
Yeah, I find the same with Dropbox.
Yeah, and another really good service, So I chose the Google ecosystem because then I can manage my domains. I can do everything. Everything was it was really like within minutes. I was clicking and going. I had registered my company domain, it absorbed it into Google Mail for like $7 or $8 a month, and I've got business email. Yep. I mean, phenomenal, like $7, $8, whatever it is. Then I was like, okay, cool. So now I've got my email sorted. I'm now communicating. Okay, cool. Google's got Meets. It's got all that sort of good stuff. Good. I'm active. Okay. Now I need to track my time. Didn't see it in Google. I went and found a tool, and that's where Harvest came in. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I was working. Now I was actually doing work. I was actually doing little projects because I wanted to see where I could create efficiencies. Then I was like, okay, cool. Now I need to solve the invoicing issue. That's where QuickBooks come in. I started with zero, and then my accountant was like, yeah, let's try QuickBooks. Great service. I'm happy with QuickBooks. Okay. Then I was like, okay, cool. If I'm running too many projects, I need to keep an order of these projects. That's where Trello sort of became an option to be able to look at as an example. So to come back to your point, it was definitely a growing thing based on what the type of work that I'm doing. And I think as a gig economy worker, I think that is so incredibly important. Just because something works for you, Ryan, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for me. And I think that's where a lot of I find in my experience talking to contractors, they sometimes fail. They say, tell me what I need to do. I think sometimes you need to experience it and do it and customize it in a way that gets the best possible productivity and output from the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
And I find that to be particularly important.
And it's so I've gone through the Trello experience and I moved away from Trello just to give you, to build on your point. And I've ended up with Notion. Now I ended up with Notion prior to it having APIs. They've just started rolling that out now. Yeah. But one of the tools that I used for years and years and years was Evernote. Just all my notes and stuff. Yeah. And I just found the frustration of opening up the book to do something. It was so slow. And also it got so unwieldy so quickly. So having Notion has been a bit better. But I actually now mix between Notion, which is basically my operational brain, because you can create relationships with things, and I quite like that. And then you can do tasks, and you can do, if I assign something to you, you'll get an email knowing that you have to do it, that kind of stuff. Then I use something called Drafts, which is great. It's a great tool if you want to write text very quickly. So you're standing in a queue and you're like, let me write down that idea.
Okay.
You open Drafts. Drafts takes you straight into with a cursor and you just start typing. But that then has to be injected. You've got to take it from Drafts and put it somewhere else. Now there's quite a strong platform in there for automation, which I haven't explored. But it's very good for those sorts of things. And then I still use Apple Notes, and I'm starting to use Apple Notes more and more since they've been improving it, because that's a nice place to scribble something, a nice place to type and draw. Yeah. And you can PDF that and then take that in somewhere else. Yeah. So
I'm fascinated to hear on you've obviously come from the workflow environment. Okay. Yeah. And I say I don't think you get a one size fits all workflow. But it's very interesting. I think there remains an opportunity that I think workflow is not the domain of big organizations anymore. That ability to be able to stitch a workflow together based on my needs, I think is a massive opportunity where companies that are understanding that link and the products that are available can definitely add value to this gig economy contractor one-man band type things. I mean, I don't know what your views on that are.
Yeah, so I really believe in personal automation. And one of the reasons that I also went the Apple route is I listened to another podcast called The Automators, and they talk a lot about workflow automation. And it's the silly things like for example, we're going to have this episode now. It's being recorded by Teams. Teams will automatically drop this down into OneDrive. But then on my laptop now is Hazel, which is a Mac only product that picks up that file, moves it to another file in Dropbox, renames it, which was wasting my time. It was costing me, 5 minutes. It was costing the 5 minutes for me to do it, but also the remembering to do it. Mm-hmm. And often I'd do the call and I'd leave, and then I'd be like, oh, geez, I haven't put that in the folder for Heather. So now I have to do when I get home. I have to do it. So that the context switching and the cognitive load is where the real value is. So Hazel does that piece. When Heather's done the audio and she's finished it, she puts it in a finalized folder. That also gets picked up by Hazel and puts that into my transcribing service folder, which is also in Dropbox, and that automatically transcribes it the first time, which means by the time I look at it, I'm really doing the fine-tuning piece. So that 80% of grunt work has been automated away. So going back to my point around personal automation, I think every worker has to understand what their workflows are. The things that get work done, and look for ways to move the mundane so they can actually do the brain work. So sort of the noise work versus the brain work. Because by getting back those 5 minutes and the cognitive load, I'm already looking at the next automation and the next automation and the next automation. And this is where I started looking at all the different cloud services. So stupid things like, I say stupid, but I get a text every morning to what the weather's going to be like. I've worked on that in the UK because the UK is very specific for this kind of stuff. It recommends what clothing to wear. Do I need a jacket or not? You're laughing at me.
No, I've got a great. No, but Ryan, I'm sorry to thought, but this is such a fascinating thing. So Do you know why Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg always have the same clothes on?
Yeah.
One less decision they have to make in the day.
Well, exactly.
And I think that talks to your point 100%. As knowledge workers, our information overload is just it's at exponential levels now compared to when your parents and my parents were working. My father started his career in 1963, ended it in close to 2000. Okay, still has the most impeccable handwriting because you'd have to write letters to people.
Yeah.
An art that is sadly being lost completely in the digital age. Different discussion. But they didn't have the same sort of information overload that we as knowledge workers are working now, where we've got this influx of information. More information means more decisions. A decision, choosing to ignore something is still a decision that we have to make.
Yep.
And being able to reduce, I think that's a very interesting point that you make, that reduction in noise versus knowledge.
Yep.
To make more effective decisions, or less decisions, but more effective ones, is where I think you see a lot of knowledge workers that are succeeding. That's what they're doing.
Yeah. No, and I mean, as you're saying, I was thinking about one of my other examples. So I've moved away from reading physical books completely now. And one of the reasons for that is if I take notes on a book, typically that would go into Notion, but then it's not been regurgitated to me. I have to go look for the notes. So I signed up with a service called Readwise. And what that does is ingests your notes out of Kindle and a few other ones. And then it every day sends you a reminder of the note you took from this book. So like if, I read one of my favorite books is Sprint, and there's sections I've highlighted. So it'll remind me, you highlighted this section. But then also in reminding me about that, it'll say, if you like this book, you might like this book. So you're constantly getting fed, as to your point, reduced information, but enough that triggers what you were thinking or reminds you of something. And I think that's where automation really helps you. Yeah. Can be helpful.
But at the same time also becomes with great power comes great responsibility. And if you look at something like the Amazon empire, which, I mean, we can all take our hats off to Jeff Bezos and what he's built with Amazon. Okay.
Yeah.
As an online bookstore and is now the world's biggest cloud infrastructure provider. Craziness.
Yeah.
Started by a bunch of South Africans, I might add. But that's
really, I didn't know that.
Down in Cape Town, dude. The initial POCs for EC2 were all done in Cape Town.
Huh.
That's why it's still got quite a big team still in Cape Town.
Oh, okay. Well, I wondered why he was building a new building in Cape Town.
Yeah, no, there's a massive historical link with AWS in South Africa because of that. So African engineers, man. But if you look at the power of Amazon for me is it's in its recommendation engine, that AI running in the background to understand when the likes of someone, the contextual understanding that Ryan is reading Sprint, making notes, is going to open up a very interesting way in how people are managing that data. Because it goes down to e-commerce play.
Yeah.
Now, suddenly you're getting a contextual email saying, oh, you might like this book, which you might not have normally got before, and you're clicking purchase.
Yeah. Although you say that Amazon still hasn't figured out that when I've actually finished reading the book, not to recommend it to me again.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. Someone was telling me the other day, Amazon's so great. They always recommend the great products. I'm like, yeah, they always recommend products I've already bought. So I'm not sure how good that is.
Well, the psychology of that could be, do you want to recommend it to buy it for a friend?
Maybe. I just think their search is broken.
Yeah. So I think I love your the notion of this sort of personal automation.
Yeah.
I think where there's an opportunity is for guys that don't necessarily know and understand the world of workflow. How do they start? How do you get out the blocks and say, okay, cool, I need to do this. I need to bring this together. And I think there's a very interesting opportunity there as the sort of gig economy starts to really, and it's big now. I mean, it's already big now, but it's growing. It's growing exponentially as more people start to realize their own internal skills that normally have been forgotten about in an organization that are now starting to come to the fore. I think even more powerful now, given the way the world has had to adapt and evolve around COVID, and I really don't want to turn this into a COVID conversation because I think we're all bored of that. Okay.
Yeah.
But COVID debunked this notion that you have to be in an office to do your job.
Yeah.
Like if there was a use case that was going to do it, COVID did that use case. And I take my hat off to my sympathies go to the commercial property guys, because I think that's going to be tough times ahead. But they've got
I mean, there's the opportunity to pivot. Because the biggest thing we miss being all remote and distributed is the brainstorming, collaboration work. And a lot of these, I mean, I found this in the bank specifically. A lot of these people, you had to be in the office 9 to 5, but you were still on the calls all day long with people in the same building as you. Yeah. And no one actually sat in the meeting room because that was too much effort to go and find a meeting room. And you could do more calls because you didn't have to go find a meeting room. But if you turn it into a more collaborative space, I think the commercial guys will come right. And I still think there is some need to be in the office, 2-3 days a week.
And I think this is where it's going to be interesting for organizations. So we obviously got this theme of the contractor and knowledge worker one man band. I think what's going to happen now is more organizations globally, they're going to be hybrid models. They're going to be hybrid working models. That's just the reality based on the industry. Okay, and those use cases are coming out now. I think there's going to be the swap in of we've got our core resources that have got a specific function, and then as we need skills, we're going to pull off the deck. And what's going to be very interesting is how the knowledge worker, the gig economy worker, adapts to the environment of a organization and the environment to them.
Yeah.
And I think cloud plays such an important role with the type of services that are happening now. I said a little bit earlier, technically speaking, I'm not even hardware dependent anymore. I'm browser dependent. Okay. I'm a Chrome user. I find even though it will suck memory like there's no tomorrow, I find that literally as long as I can gain access to Chrome, I have access to all my work. I mean,
so a little tip there: switch to Brave.
To Brave, what's Brave?
Brave is a Chromium browser.
Yeah.
So it's based on the engine, but very privacy focused.
Oh, really?
And I found, because when I was running the Mac for the first couple of weeks, I kept wondering why is everything so slow?
Yeah.
And then I tried a different Chromium browser, which was that Generate one, where they give you money for seeing the adverts.
Yeah.
And it got worse. And then I happened to hear a podcast about Brave again. I was like, let me try Brave. And since I've been running Brave and Safari, both of and this is the key, the Chrome browser and the Generate browser aren't built for the M1 chip.
It's still running it's running through Rosetta Stone and being transcoded.
Exactly. And the Brave one has got an M1 chip version, and all my stuff's there. So I was like, I'll just use Brave. And you get cryptocurrency while you're browsing. So that also helps.
No, it's fascinating. I think, and this is what's creating. I think this is exactly what's driving this gig economy now. We are not beholden to the place. I happen to be working at home today. I've got a little office that I go to because I've got a little office that I go to. Okay, that's my choice. Okay.
Yep.
But as productive as I am here as I am at that little office, there's no difference. Okay. I'm just fortunate that my wife brings me a cup of tea every so often, and I don't get that at the office, which is cool. But this is what's fueling this change, and the way we are having to adapt. So, as your audience might not know this, I mean, obviously Ryan's a young parent. He's got a 3-year-old and a almost 1-year-old. I'm in the same boat. I've got a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And anyone that knows kids of that age, we are firmly in the trenches.
Yep.
Like we're taking hand grenades hard. Okay. And suicide hour between 5 and 7 is quite literally that. The way in which I'm able now to structure my life can accommodate that.
Yep.
Where previously, my previous work, I had to work I was working at my head office was about 45 kilometers away from my house, about an hour to an hour and a half in traffic in the car. Okay. And I'd have to, I lost so much time driving, so much time. Okay. And we're all used to that and that sort of thing. When COVID hits, I was buying almost 3 hours a day in productivity. But more importantly, when my day ended at 5 o'clock with my last meeting, which was a choice I made, that's when I was working, even though I was available after that. Between 5 and 8 is suicide 3 hours. Okay.
Yep.
which being a knowledge worker, digitally connected worker, allowed me to be able to do. My wife wasn't then left to have to try to sort it out, which has unfortunately been the reality for many stay-at-home parents, both male and female, who are often left to have to fend for youngsters while the breadwinner, he or she is busy earning money.
Yep.
I find that I'm getting a little bit more time with my kids because of that. Okay. Yep. I don't have the same sort of experiences, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, so I went through a few phases. So the first phase, we were still back in the UK. So exactly that. I mean, I saved. So we moved from being just outside London to be way outside London. So my sort of hour commute became an hour and a half commute. Not that I ever did the long commute, because when we moved into our new house, that's when the lockdown started. Mm-hmm. But gaining back the 3 hours, as you say, the first phase was I thought, I've got all this time, I must do more stuff. Mm-hmm. So I worked longer. I worked on my book. I studied courses, whatever. And then I've realized that I was just burning out. Like
the gray area happened. That time. Yeah.
And also I found because my son is, it was in nursery. He was taken to nursery in that, but because I was burning out, I wasn't getting good time with him either. So put in some boundaries, but more health focused too. So instead of doing 2 extra hours of work, I'd be like, I'm going to go for a walk every day for an hour. And we did that because we had that 1 hour fitness. And the mornings became gym first. Well, in the South African house, gym first. Then I do a bit of work. Then I go for a walk, and then whatever. So a much more balanced experience. When we were in the UK, I was walking a lot anyway, because of commuting to the office and all that stuff. The other thing and exactly your thing about support and supporting your family. So I've seen a couple things where people say, but I now do the washing, I do housework when I should be working, etc. And there's almost like a guilt, like you should be working all the time. I feel that too. And yeah, we're lucky in South Africa. You can have a domestic work 5 days a week, and it's not too, it's not exorbitant expensive like it is in the UK. But what I have found is it's you those chores that you'd almost spend your whole weekend doing, you can mix them in your day whilst you're still working. And like you, I have the 5 to 7 fun. And then once my son's asleep, if there's still something to do, I can go up to my study. I could work 2 hours. I still work a 10-hour day, 12-hour day, but I've done so much in that day. Yeah. Whereas that exact point that you made about losing time commuting, okay, I listen to podcasts, I read a book, I work on stuff. But I still feel like, and you do need those spaces between home and work. So that's the one trick that I think we all need to find a solution for, like going for a walk at the end of the day at 5 o'clock to end your day. But, all intents and purposes, I'm a much happier person now that I'm not commuting 15 hours a week.
No, completely. And I think this is so anecdotally. I mean, I'm sort of the same in the morning with my exercise as well. I'm a cyclist, which takes a little bit more time than say running.
Yeah.
I have the choice. Granted, not during winter because it's super cold, but to be able to cycle in the morning. Plus, I can cycle on my smart trainer if I really wanted to, and do calls. I mean, I've done, and I'll switch the video off. I've actually done conference calls where I'm not the active participant in the conference call. I've actually been on my bike. So pedaling there, I just make sure that when I'm going up a hill, I switch off the volume. It becomes a very awkward sound. But anyway, but you find ways to be more productive, to make better utilization of the time that we have. It's the one resource that is finite.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've got to, and I think in today's economy, the modern digital economy, we have to find if you can't solve the scaling issue, okay, which we have to do. Any business has to solve the scaling issue. You've got to find ways to better optimize your time. Now,
well, I'm going to argue about the finite resource thing. So it's not just time; it's energy as well.
Yeah.
You can't be 100% all day long. You have to take the breaks. And I've had a person who had COVID, had to go in ICU, and she was trying to work before she went off. And I kept saying, just rest. The work's always going to be there. Rest. And we convince ourselves that if we're not doing the work, it's life and death. Yeah. And often, in our roles, often it's not. Obviously there are roles, but it is life and death. But
yeah, no, absolutely. I think someone actually said this to me, and I found it to be a very interesting little tip for guys that are I mean, we're a year and a bit into sort of lockdown around the world and working from home. It's almost become the norm now. What some people are doing, which I found fascinating, is we are geared from when we are kids that we've got a routine. We are human beings thrive in routine. And our routine is get up, get dressed, have breakfast, get ready for school, go to school.
Yeah.
High school, university, work. It's the same routine for 30 years. Okay. This thing broke that routine. And what I'm seeing a lot of people having done is they still get dressed for work as if they're going to work. The psychology of I'm in the mindset at that particular point in time is it's helped a lot of people. That's the first thing. Okay. The second thing, this is you're gonna laugh at me for this one. I know guys that what they will do is get dressed, get in their car, drive around the block, and then get home.
I'm raising my hand because I did that.
No, and it's a psychology. It gets you in the mindset, okay? Because at 5 o'clock, you're going to get in your car, drive around the block, as silly as that might look. But when you get home, you're home.
Yeah.
One of my things my wife and I argue quite a bit on, she feels that I'm way too attached to my phone.
Yeah.
And I'll take that one, that I'm not present. And I think with something that I work very, very hard on, that I need to disconnect. You don't have to answer at WhatsApp this minute. Yes, you can answer it in 10 minutes, but be there, be present, be in the moment.
We have the same problem, but then again, we are very similar. And my sort of solution to that has been, as much as it irritates my wife as well, is my phone sits in my study from 5 o'clock until the next morning. And she says, yeah, but what happens if I need to call you when I'm out? Well, it's or if there's an emergency. I said, look, if it's an emergency, I doubt there's much I'm going to do at 3 o'clock in the morning for anyone. Yeah. And if it is an emergency, it's going to ring
100 times. Yeah.
In the study, I'll hear it and it'll wake everyone up anyway. So, it just creates that connection break. That's not to say I don't have my iPad with me or something like that, but things like WhatsApp are very easy to draw you in because it's an instant messenger conversation. You want to be part of the conversation. You want to make the chirps or whatever it is. There was something else I wanted to ask you. So you mentioned that you work at home and you work in an office. Have you duplicated your setup in both places?
So very interesting. The cloud has allowed me not to do that. If that makes any sort of sense. Obviously, I've got a mobile desktop, so I've got my laptop, my bag, and I'm an office in a bag. So what I have at home goes in my bag and goes to the office and comes home. Okay.
Yeah.
So what I've done is much like you, Ryan. We've got the standing desk. So I've got a standing desk with a screen at work.
Yeah.
I've got my Mac. I've got my connectors. I've got all my cables. I figured out what works for me. I'll bring my iPad because we dual screen on the iPad, all that good stuff. And when I set up, it takes me about 5 or 10 minutes to set up, and I'm set up. Okay, and I'm going. One of the things I've played around with, which I think will be a overkill, is actually having like a sort of a Mac Mini at the office and having my laptop at home. And it sort of beats the point of having a laptop. It's the same chipset, it's the same power, and guess what? I'm still going through the browser.
Yeah.
So I think the big thing for me, I haven't had to duplicate.
Yeah.
I've set myself up that I've got my office in a bag. I've got everything that I need to be productive, including my wireless keyboard and all that good stuff. The browser, however, if I'm out and I'm not at my laptop, because I've got access to the browser, I can get to my work regardless of where I am. The nature of our cloud is set up, I am always on duplication. How's that for a nice term for today? Always on availability and duplication of my work.
Yeah. No, you're spot on. I mean, there's, barring the odd little things like, trying to do something on a server through a virtual connection or RDP at least, or some apps don't allow you the functionality to do something on the phone. You have to get it onto a browser. Yeah. Most things you could do with your phone if you need to. Which brings you back to an integrated lifestyle where you can go and do something with your kids. And if someone calls you and there's an emergency, you can say, look, I can reset a password. I can approve that expense claim. I can whatever it is, at least until I get back to a browser.
Well, so this is another interesting discussion, what's urgent and what's important. And this is, I think, plaguing a lot of the gig economy, because we're so easily connected. the urgency level is now there. And as human beings, we always got this instant gratification. And as a knowledge worker, gratification means I've achieved the work, or I've done the thing, I've delivered the thing, or the person receiving it has got what they've needed. As good or bad as that is, and that's a whole different debate.
Yeah.
It goes back to the balance. I think the balance of that is so important. And I think with anyone that's getting into this sort of gig economy, setting the parameters for your contract, the people you're working with is so important, right? I know, for example, with one of my small customer that I do weekend work with, I literally say it's stipulated in our agreement. During the week, I'm not available. I've got my primary customer, which is my primary employer, and they're the ones I service during the week. Yeah. If you want my services, I'm available in evenings and on the weekends, stipulated. There's clear boundaries that are created to allow me to be able to accommodate that particular piece of work. And I think it also goes through to availability. Yeah. We are not robots. And see, there are knowledge workers on quite literally machines. I think the human body is being pressed, and the brain now is being pressed so hard that we're exceeding what we thought was capable. But burnout is a real reality for knowledge workers. And too often, and I've been fortunate, touch wood, I don't think it's a matter of if rather than when. I haven't suffered from burnout. But from people that I've spoken to that have, often it's you fall off the cliff before you realize it's happened.
Yeah, it is like.
And going back to your point on personal automation, I think that is such a critical importance of when you're setting up how you want your little ecosystem to work, that you set those physical boundaries when I'm available, when I'm not. Mm-hmm. It's not a choice, and everything is a choice to set notifications when you're alerted of an update. You don't have to set a notification. Yeah. You choose to set the notification, which means you are actively prompting the device or software to tell you something's happening. Yeah. You can set WhatsApp to be muted, and you can read your messages, later.
Well, it's funny you say that. I was with a friend of ours who's on one of our groups, and we were on Sunday, and he said to me, "I'm so sorry, I haven't been replying to the group. I've been so busy." And I was like, "Dude, it's not a requirement to reply to the messages. You're included. It's your choice."
But it's like, but society goes back to that instant gratification, being acknowledged. We want to be acknowledged. You can always spot the guys. It's so interesting, WhatsApp groups, and it's the same with work groups. It's the same with psychology. Yeah. You always find the ones that are the most active, like replying straight away. That's their way of doing things. Or the ones that are looking for a response because they've sent a funny meme or an attachment of work done. We've got to choose what is our personality and how we want to work, and accommodate our ecosystem, our little micro ecosystem, to accommodate that particular way of working.
Yeah, I mean, one question I had for you, which probably maybe our last one will tie up, is when you estimate your work, do you, even though you're tracking it by the hours, do you actually quote in hours, or do you quote for a service price?
Both.
Okay, so it depends on the. Yeah.
It depends. As I'm getting better, okay, so for me, pricing is such it's a minefield. What is someone willing to pay? Always becomes the discussion point. And you've got to get trust in your customer that regardless if it took you 1 hour or 10 hours, they're happy with the work that's being delivered, regardless of what the fee is. Yeah. And the only way you find that balance is by data, understanding how much I'm spending, when am I spending it, and how do I optimize, and then focusing on those particular products. If someone's happy with your work, they're not going to question how you got there. Yeah, that's the one experience that I have noticed. The second thing is transparency. Yeah, and I think an open and clear communication with the team that you're working with on what your utilization is, what you're doing is very important. Okay. If you want to milk it on a once-off gig, that's your business. If you want long-term business, you need to have that level of transparency. I think is critically important. It is a balance. It is a balance between that. The guys that do really well, the guys can get margins out of easily repeatable work that delivers value to the person receiving it.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. Great. So where can people get hold of you, John, if they want to get in contact?
So you can certainly go to my website, which is magnify.biz, or john@magnify.biz. Very, very easy. Just go to my website, or you can drop me a mail. Happy to chat. If anyone wants to chat, happy to engage.
Super. Great. Thanks, John. It was great to have you on.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Heather Bicknell is our producer and editor. Thank you, Heather, for your hard work on this episode. Please subscribe to the series and rate us on iTunes or the Google Play Store. Follow us on Twitter @the DWW Podcast. The show notes and transcripts will be available on the website www.digitalworkspace.works. Please also visit our website www.digitalworkspace.works and subscribe to our newsletter. And lastly, if you found this episode useful, please share with your friends or colleagues.